Today's major news from Korea. It is estimated that the government has invested at least 8 trillion won in the introduction of vaccines and treatments after the novel coronavirus outbreak. If the unexecuted budget is included, it is close to 10 trillion won. The government has so far secured 260.82 million doses of vaccine for COVID-19, and 2,400,000 doses of treatment. However, recently, the number of vaccinations has remained virtually the same. The prescription rate for treatments is also low. A survey result showed that 3 out of 10 Koreans would not receive additional vaccinations, and despite the spread of infection, the number of patients transitioning to a severe stage did not increase significantly, and the prescription rate for taking medicines was only 30%. The quarantine authorities are recommending vaccination and treatment, but it is unclear how many people will participate. According to the data of the Corona-19 Vaccination Response Promotion Team on the 17th, the number of COVID-19 vaccines contracted by the government with domestic and foreign pharmaceutical companies from 2020 to September 15 of this year was 260.84 million doses. Pfizer had the most with 127.49 million servings, followed by Moderna with 54 million, Novavax with 40 million, AstraZeneca with 20 million, Domestic Vaccine with 10 million, Covax with 7.35 million, and Janssen with 2 million. To this end, the government has prepared a total budget of 7.68 trillion won over 3 years. After a sharp increase from 356.1 billion won in 2020 to 4.863 trillion won in 2021, it was reduced to 2.94 trillion won this year. The budget execution rate recorded 222.3 billion won, or 62.43% in 2020, and 92.87%, or 4.561 trillion won, last year. As of September 15, this year, the figure was 1.49 trillion won, or 50.58%, slightly more than half. The total amount of execution over the 3 years so far is 6.229 trillion won. Separately, the government has secured a total of 2,004,000 doses of corona treatment. Starting with Pfizer's Paxlovid, the U.S. pharmaceutical company Merck's Lagevrio signed a contract to introduce it. The first volume came from Pfizer in January. The COVID-19 treatment budget included in the budget released by the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on August 31 last year was 16.8 billion won. This is equivalent to 18,000 people, and the cost per person is calculated to be about 950,000 won. It is estimated that up to 1.8 trillion won was spent on purchasing the treatment. Although the government is trying to secure and expand the application of vaccines and treatments, there is a tendency to be reluctant to take vaccinations and treatments. If fewer people are looking for vaccines and treatments that have an expiration date, it can naturally lead to scrap. Vaccines and treatments that cost trillions of won should be discarded. According to a survey conducted by a research team at the Vaccine Innovation Center at Korea University Medical School on 1,500 general adult men and women over the age of 19 nationwide, 30.5% answered that they had no intention of receiving additional vaccinations against COVID-19 this fall or winter. 3 out of 10 will not get additional vaccines. According to the research team, the result of this study is because many people think that the government and pharmaceutical companies are distorting or covering up about the effectiveness and safety of the COVID-19 vaccine. It is understood that prescriptions for COVID-19 treatment are limited to 30%. It is encouraging considering the poor performance, including 109 prescriptions for a week out of 21,000 people brought in at the beginning of the year, but the government still sees it as a low figure. If the use of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments decreases, the existing stock will have no choice but to be disposed of. Because of the expiration date, 581,686 vials and 1.4498 syringes have already been discarded due to the expiration of the expiration date. If we add up the cases of vaccine temperature deviation and container breakage, at least 5,911,920 vaccines were discarded from February last year to recently. It was confirmed on the 16th that Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power had applied to the government to compensate the cost of 727.7 billion won for the early closure of Wolsong Nuclear Power Plant Unit 1. Wolsong Nuclear Power Plant Unit 1 was decided to be shut down early in 2018 in accordance with the Moon Jae-in government's nuclear phase-out policy and was permanently suspended in December 2019. As a result, the passport said, there has been criticism that the huge cost of the Moon Jae-in government's nuclear phase-out policy has been paid for with the public's blood tax. According to the ruling party, People's Power, in June, KHNP submitted an application to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy to compensate the cost of Wolsong Nuclear Power Plant No. 1 for 727.746 billion won. Initially, KHNP invested 555.5 billion won in equipment to obtain approval to continue operating Wolsong Nuclear Power Plant No. 1 until 2022, and the cost of goods purchased for the operation of Wolsong Nuclear Power Plant No. 1 was 14.6 billion won. The People's Power explained, KHNP has been preparing to continue operating the Wolsong Nuclear Power Plant No. 1, but this cost occurred as the operation was halted in 2019 due to the Moon Jae-in administration's unilateral nuclear phase-out policy. The reason why KHNP was able to apply for cost compensation to the government was because of the decision made during the Moon Jae-in administration. The Moon Jae-in government announced the energy conversion roadmap including the early shutdown of Wolsong Nuclear Power Plant Unit 1 in October 2017, and the government decided to compensate for the cost of implementing the energy transition policy. Then, in June 2021, the government decided to amend the enforcement decree of the Electricity Business Act, which includes using the electricity fund to compensate for the sunk costs of nuclear power generation. The electricity fund is a kind of quasi-tax type financial resource that is created by deducting 3.7% of the electricity bills paid by the public each month, and is mainly used to supply power to islands and remote areas. However, the amendment of the enforcement ordinance at the time of the Moon Jae-in administration added a purpose to be used to compensate for the loss of the nuclear power plant business caused by the nuclear phase-out policy, and the fact that KHNP applied for cost compensation to the government was also the basis for this enforcement ordinance. KHNP has been operating its own Wolsong Unit 1 Cost Compensation Task Force to apply for cost compensation after the Moon-song government's decision to close Wolsong Unit 1 early as a result of the nuclear phase-out policy. After a resolution by the Board of Directors in June, an application for cost compensation of over 700 billion won was submitted to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy. In response, the ruling party said, bills for failure of the nuclear phase-out policy are coming to the public one by one, and pointed out that the Moon Jae-in administration's promise that there would be no burden on the people from nuclear phase-out turned out to be a lie. In accordance with KHNP's application, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy plans to determine the specific scope and scale of cost compensation after deliberation by the Cost Compensation Deliberation Committee. If it is decided to pay all or part of the cost will be deducted from the electricity fund. An official from the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said, "It is currently under internal review," he said. After the resolution of the Deliberation Committee, if the government plan is finalized, the final cost compensation amount is determined after deliberation by the National Assembly budget. In addition to Wolsong Nuclear Power Plant Unit 1, KHNP also plans to apply for cost compensation for Daejeon Units 1 and 2 in Samcheok-si, Gangwon-do, and Cheonji Units 1 and 2 in Yongdeok-gun, Gyeongsangbuk-do, which have been suspended due to the Moon Jae-in government's nuclear phase-out policy. KHNP, which was initially preparing for new nuclear power plants, the Daejeon Nuclear Power Plant and the Cheonji-1 Power Plant, decided to close the two nuclear power plants in 2018. As a result, there is an observation that there is a possibility that the burden on the public may increase as a result of the nuclear phase-out policy. The two major indicators of the Seoul real estate market, transaction volume and price, are falling together, continuing a downtrend. Seoul apartment transaction volume is highly likely to hit an all-time low in August as well as in July. According to the real estate information media on the 17th, the number of apartment sales in Seoul in August was 521, which was lower than that in July. The number of apartment sales in Seoul in July, finally counted on the 1st, was 641, the lowest since 2006 statistics were compiled. The actual transaction reporting deadline is 1 month from the transaction date, and although the August transaction volume may be added, it is expected to be less or similar to the July transaction volume due to the practice of closing it within 2 weeks. The worst trading cliff that started in July is continuing. Compared to the same month of the previous year, apartment sales in Seoul were 4,679 and 4,064, respectively. Compared to the same month of this year, the decrease in sales volume in July reached 86.3%. August is also expected to show a decline of more than 80%. By district, Yongsan-jung-no-gu had the lowest number of apartment sales in August, followed by Gwangjin-gu and Yeonggu. Gangnam-gu had the largest number of locations. Apartment prices in Seoul are also plummeting. Last month, a 134 square meter unit dedicated to Dogak-Rixl in Gangnam-gu, Seoul was sold for 4.23 billion won. The sale price in May was 4.94 billion won, down 710 million won in 3 months. The 84 square meter dedicated to Gemsal LS in Songpagu was traded at 2.05 billion won last month. This is a decrease of 650 million won from the highest price of 2.7 billion won in October last year. In 10 months, the price fell by 24.1%. A real estate agency official said, the first floor is for sale at 1.95 billion won. Although the amount is lower than the Gangnam area, the Gangbuk area also has a steep decline in apartment prices. The 114 square meter dedicated to Remian Prugio in Mapogu was traded at 2.2 billion won last month, down 200 million won in 1 month from the previous month's 2.4 billion won. The 84 square meter dedicated to Remian Weave in Dongdaemun-gu was sold for 1.24 billion won last month. The actual transaction price in July is 1.33 billion won. That's $90,000 in less than a month. Experts cited interest rate stabilization as the key to market change. Consumers need time to adjust to interest rates, said Kookmin Bank's senior real estate expert. Despite the abundance of jobs due to the recovery of daily life after the coronavirus, there is a phenomenon that young people are struggling with the difficulty of finding a job. This is due to the mismatch between the preferred experience of companies and the job market. It is pointed out that the only fundamental solution is to resolve the dual structure of the labor market, such as the wage gap between large companies and SMEs. According to the National Statistical Office on the 17th, the unemployment rate in Korea was 2.1% in August, down 0.5 percentage points from the same month of the previous year, the lowest on record. Excluding the frictional unemployment that occurs in the process of job search such as job change and job search, it is virtually at the level of full employment. That means there are plenty of jobs. The increase in the number of employed people in the same month was 807,000 compared to the same month of the previous year, the highest in 14 years since 2008 as of August. However, the situation is different for young people in their 20s. The overall unemployment rate in the first half of this year was only 3.3% on average, but the youth unemployment rate averaged 6.9% during the same period. While the overall unemployment rate fell to 2.9% and 2.1% in July and August, respectively, the youth unemployment rate only dropped to 6.8% and 5.4%. In the case of the extended unemployment rate, which includes the de facto unemployed who are looking for a job while working part-time, the young people have maintained a level of around 20% every month this year, and recorded 18% in August. The reason the job boom deflects young people is that companies prefer experienced jobs that require less cost and time for education and can be put into practice immediately. In the job market where casual recruitment is common, job-seeking students who have just graduated from college or graduate school and have no experience are at a relatively disadvantageous position. Among the major domestic conglomerates Samsung, SK, Hyundai Motor, LG, and Lotte, Samsung is the only company that still maintains open recruitment for new employees. According to a recent survey conducted by the Korea Federation of Entrepreneurs through a specialized agency, the top 500 companies in domestic sales plan to hire 35.8% of new college graduates as experienced workers in the second half of this year. The proportion increased even more from 29.7% in the first half of this year. A mismatch between the supply and demand for jobs is also a major cause of youth unemployment. Certain industries such as shipbuilding, catering, agriculture and taxis, and small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, complain of difficulties in finding workers. According to the government, there were 234,000 vacant jobs as of June this year, of which 96%, or 224,000, were created by businesses with fewer than 300 employees. On the other hand, the jobs preferred by young people are limited to places with good treatment such as large corporations and public institutions. Thank you for watching today. Please subscribe and set an alarm.